Well, aren't we having a blast with the absurdities over the last couple of days, right? Listen, this is about one thing, okay? The parachute opening on Mars, for example. I cannot prove that it didn't open, right? And you cannot prove that it did open, right? This is about the things that people will believe, right? That's what this is about. I'm not naive enough to believe that a parachute opened on Mars, like that one that we saw, it slammed open, right, and slowed down just over a ton of hardware as it was approaching Mars. The reason I don't believe that, the reason I say I'm not naive enough to believe, is because I'm also not naive enough to believe that there were 6 successful moon landings between 1969 and 1972. I am not naive enough to believe that we no longer have the technology that they had back then. I'm not naive enough to believe that Apollo 13 blew an air tank and ended up going all the way around the moon and landed safely with everybody on board. I'm not naive enough to believe that stuff because I'm in touch with reality. But you guys, you haven't had a chance to not believe it because it's been forced down your throats since you were very, very young. So there's no point in us arguing about any chute that opened in 0.6% of Earth's atmospheric conditions, because you can't prove that it did, and I can't prove that it didn't, okay? We're just going to have to leave it there, because I am not naive enough to believe it to be true, the same as I'm not naive enough to believe the moon landings, right? But you guys swear by the moon landings, even though every day something else comes out and something else comes out. The body language from Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, Neil Armstrong, it was all there. You even heard Buzz saying, I didn't go, but you still believe the absurdity, right? You defend the absurdity. That's where these things are happening. So when I say lack of common sense, I am talking about a lack of common sense, but it isn't fully your fault. You haven't had a chance to analyse things. They're always forcing stuff, absurdities down your throat. The same as, may I add, the people. This morning, the amount of people, that is wind and sand. That group has been created by wind and sand, sandblasting. You stand in the desert for 4,500 years and you'll get a ridge round you, someone said. The common sense, right? It's non-existent. Look, somebody said earthquakes. It's earthquake damage. Look, loads of people still convinced that people were scurrying up and taking bits of stone and taking them down to build other stuff. People, those of you who do think these things, you haven't got any common sense, because it doesn't matter what you're taught, right? By looking at those things, you should understand that what you're talking is absolute rubbish. Knowing that Pyramid Giza alone weighs the equivalent of 65 Nimitz-class aircraft carriers, the people with common sense will listen to that and they'll go, how heavy? 65 Nimitz-class aircraft carriers? How did they do that? With just copper handles. But the people with no common sense will stick to their guns and say, no, yes, they did it. We have the records, right? We have the records, supply records of drop-offs and pickups. It's like, so that is your reason for believing that the Egyptians carved the equivalent weight of 65 Nimitz-class aircraft carriers out of wherever with just copper hand tools. The reason you believe it is because you've got inventory. Somebody's found an inventory of 4,500 years ago. Now, this is what I mean by a lack of common sense, right? It's just incredible, the things that you people, I say you people, because all of you on the end of this are just giving it this. But if you really stop to think about what you're saying, you'll realize how fucking stupid, how silly you're being, okay? Now, I was gonna do a sun thing, but this has just escalated a little bit too long, so I'm not going to do that one right now. But what I will do, I'm gonna do the other one that I've been thinking about for a little bit of time. I was talking to somebody else about it the other day. What we have, right? The GPS. Well, how does GPS work? Again, right? People, if you don't know how GPS works, you cannot use it and say, that proves at the speed of light, no. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It's exactly the same as saying, oh, look what I found. It's the inventory. It's a drop-off of stones for the pyramids. This doesn't prove that that was built. It's a piece of freaking paper. Don't you get that? We found the inventory records. Oh, it's the lack of common sense, right? Dunning-Kruger. You guys are beyond Dunning-Kruger, right? Way beyond Dunning-Kruger. Got this thing, Earth, right? So here's Earth, and it has a diameter of 12,742 kilometers, okay? We've got the GPS satellites. Now they orbit at approximately 20,000 kilometers altitude. So we'd say, well, that's 12, that's about here. That's how far. So if we've got two satellites, opposite sides of the planet, right, we've got 12,742 and another 20,000, right? So what we have is a total. This is just the whole distance of the whole package, right? So we've got 2, 4, 7, boom, and we've got 2, and what are we talking? 52, right? 52,742 kilometers from here to there, okay? 52,742 kilometers. Just call it 52,000, right? Now, that distance, people are going on about, yeah, but the reason GPS works is because of this, because what you're failing to understand is the diameter of the sun would engulf all of that. How many times? 1,390,000 kilometers, the diameter. Right? And you've got that system, 52, 24, 25, 26, 27. Alexa, what's 1,390,000 divided by 52,000?
1,390,000 divided by 52,000 is approximately 26.730.
26. So that system fits inside the sun 26 times. But you believe that all these little signals are going bouncing here and there and back and forth and doing what they're doing. You think that those little tiny signals prove that this radiates its light at 4.6 seconds per diameter. You're convinced, right, that it radiates its light at 299,792 kilometers per second. The moon, the Earth, moon, fits inside the sun. The trip to the moon fits inside the sun 3.6 times. Right? So that's 1, 2, 3, moon, 0.6, right? So cut a little bit off of that. 1, 2, 3.6 times. That is a little bit too, so it should be about there, right? So that's from Earth to the moon, Earth to the moon, Earth to the moon, and 0.6 times. That is how big the sun's diameter is. So when you keep yapping on about the tiny little satellites in here, prove that this beast radiates its light at a rate of 4.6 seconds per diameter, or it takes 8 minutes and 20 seconds for the light to reach planet Earth from the sun. It's a lack of common sense, a lack of looking at the big picture, but you've been funneled into this zone where you don't know how to differentiate between what's real and what isn't, and what's possible and what isn't, right? So I'm going to do another example of why I think the lack of common sense is a pandemic. It really is. You absolutely have no idea what you're talking about. The things that you talk about, there's no depth to anything people say. Talk about the pyramids and stuff like that. You're just absolutely clueless, right? The pyramids weigh the equivalent of 65 Nimitz. Giza weighs the equivalent of 65 Nimitz class aircraft carriers. 65 aircraft carriers. And you people believe that the Egyptians dug that stone out with their bare hands, or copper hand tools. It's the same thing, really. Do you not hear what it is you're saying? Copper hand tools, the weight of 65 Nimitz class aircraft carriers. You laugh at me, guys, but I tell you what, you have no idea how misguided you are, right? Honestly, we don't have the technology we did back in 1969. That's why we're not going back to the moon. Really. This is what I mean. It's things you come out with to justify the stupidity that is as amazing as anything else, right? So I'll leave you with that, and I'm going to wipe the board clear and show you another angle why I think it's ridiculous that people think that it takes 4.6 seconds for the sun to radiate light the distance of its diameter, for a total of 8 minutes and 20 seconds to radiate its light to planet Earth. Okay? So keep on calling me Dunning-Kruger. It really doesn't matter, because people with no common sense, no sense of logic and rational thought, doesn't bother me what you call me, because it just doesn't matter. You have got no common sense. Alright? So straight back at you, folks. I will be back with another sun angle. Laters.